It's our great pleasure to introduce the chair for the plenary session, Marty Donkervoort. Marty, come forward. Oh, is it Annika? Well, there we go. Marty has changed. It's actually my relation here, my ex-boss, Annika Goodall.
Kia ora koroa for mō ngā kupu tuatai o te rā nei tēnā koroa, mō te whakaro tino tika te kaupapa araha ki te tangata. Ka ao, ka awatea. It is early morning, it is daybreak. Here we are, ka koro ki anō te manu, the birds again calling the new day. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Very excited to have this opportunity for the first conversation of the day. We've got a brief window of time, so we're going to attempt to be efficient with that, and aroha mai. If you've got questions that come up out of this really interesting subject, please do fire them into Q&A, but just the warning up front that I'm not sure how much time we're going to have to process them. Selfishly, I'd be really interested in your views. I've really enjoyed looking at the questions that have come through in the other sessions. We're sitting with two principal questions this morning. One is, in those circumstances where life comes along and gives us a kick in the pants, let's call it an earthquake by way of example, and a community is forced into shock mode, how do we respond in those circumstances? Are there lessons that we can take from those situations and agree that maybe there's some responses that hold true across different shocks or circumstances of that nature? And then the flip side of that is, if we know that here's a few things that can be done with effect in those cases, why don't we just take them and not wait for the earthquake, not wait for the challenge? Is it possible to take those proactively into needs or the things that need addressed? So there's the sort of space we're sitting in. I'm going to hand over to our colleagues here, each to make their presentations from quite different perspectives, really fascinating looks into this question. By way of very quick thumbnail introduction, Marty Donkervoort, furthest away from me, based in Winnipeg, Canada, some decades experience working in hollowed out or abandoned communities occupied by immigrant populations, Indigenous populations. Really interesting perspective. Marty, like a lot of us, has got experience in the public sector, the corporate sector, and in the social sector, and one of the things that he does is teaches social things to MBA students. Beside Marty, a friend and colleague, Raf Manji, Christchurch City, also with a varied background from foreign currency trading to establishing social good organisations, social enterprises in Christchurch City, and serves on the Christchurch City Council along with Leanne Dalzell, our Mayor, holding the position of Strategy and Finance Committee member. Welcome Raf, and beside Raf, Andrea Chen, also from the North American continent, Ivy League trained, co-founder and executive director of Propeller, a not-for-profit operating in New Orleans, supporting entrepreneurs in that space who are grappling with a specific range of issues. In, I think, 2009 start, 130 organisations started across that time, some $75 million worth of finance channelled in to those enterprises. So really interesting but diverse array of experiences. Before I unleash these guys on you, I'd like to have a quick go at that first question, lessons learned. One thing that's struck me as an observer of what's happened here in Christchurch is that, now I'll cut a few corners and do this fast, but if you can imagine there's a shock, it's an earthquake, you're closed out of your house, there's a cordon around it, you have army personnel making sure that no one can go into that zone. All the things that you value in life, whether that's a change of clothes or valuables or your photograph albums, are on the other side of a cordon and you can't get to it. And that might be for a short period, it might be for a long period. In some people's cases it was forever. Those buildings were demolished and taken away, and so there's a great space between you and your former life, and that's one of the things that's happening in the context of the significant trauma. We heard not long after the earthquakes from the San Francisco experience where the example was very similar. If you imagine the same situation, and what the authorities did is say, "Excuse me, ma'am, your house is dangerous. The roof might collapse, but what we're going to do, we think we can get you in there safely and out if you want to do this. We'll come with you. You will have 30 minutes, and you can get that photo album. You can take the painting off the wall. You can find the locket of hair from your child or whatever, and then they might never get back into that bit of their past, but they had the respect of the approach. They had the opportunity to go back and collect things that were important, and that in itself was an opportunity to start. Obviously, there's a grieving process and a resetting of an approach to where we go next. And the juxtaposition I would make is that I think Christchurch City had a lot of the former. There was quite a lot of separation between what was going on and people's involvement in that, people's opportunity to have agency in that conversation. And that theme carried on in other things. I think that that has the effect of divorcing people from their own circumstances, disempowering them, getting distance, and I think that the city is worse off for that approach. I think the alternative is that where people have got engagement, potential for opportunity to be involved and own some of that conversation, I think the mental health statistics are far better. I think the community sense of ownership of the situation is far stronger, and I think the city itself would have been far stronger in our case. There's my starter for 10 for one potential lesson learned. Enough from me. Raf, could we invite you to get us going, please?
Tēnā koutou katoa, good morning Christchurch, and again welcome to all those people who've come to visit our lovely city from outside. Now I presume we have a presentation to go? We do, excellent. Okay, I'm going to talk very briefly this morning about three particular social enterprises that sprung up after the earthquake, and a little bit about their journey and their lessons. And this is not about saying, you know, these are incredible organisations. It's more actually about the journey they've had, why they started their enterprise, and some of those lessons. So a quick bit of context. Lovely picture there, quite bracing, especially for those of you who are not from here. This is what our city looked like a year or so after the earthquake, where we'd had a lot of buildings demolished, a lot of space there. Space is opportunity. And, you know, the desire and the will to rebuild the city, and the question of how you're going to do that. You need a lot of capital, financial capital, but also human capital and spirit capital as well. We're also living in a time of compressed change, and that means that new trends and old structures can be exacerbated and reinforced. So one of the trends you'll see around the city in terms of building is a lot of glass and steel. So we've got a lot of glass and steel. That's the trend. We also have existing inequalities in the city, which the earthquake actually entrenched further, and that's another important trend to think about. We have a global economy which is starting to move away from the extractive approach and shift towards a regeneration approach. That's something that we need to work on. It's a trend that is coming. It's more advanced in some places than others. And obviously a post-disaster situation offers that opportunity, but that opportunity needs to be grasped. Another thing to mention also is technology. You know, we're shifting purely from just industrial production to actually creating, collaborating, and problem solving. And these big trends all fit into the great opportunity that comes to a city like Christchurch, especially after the earthquake. You know, we're the ideal size. You know, we're big enough to be a city, but we're not too big. We're resource rich with fantastic ecological resources, which supported the city after the earthquake, but also great human resources as well. And as part of that, we've become a little bit of a laboratory for the future, because it's the sort of place that people can come and trial things. And actually failing is quite cool, and we don't worry too much about that. But also we're in this kind of compressed period where we want recovery, we want regeneration, and that drives opportunity and change. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these three wonderful people. Some of them hopefully are in the audience. I won't point them out. And the journey they had, the organisations they set up, and why they set those up. They were clearly a direct response to the earthquake, but it's interesting to know that it wasn't the earthquake itself that drove the businesses, but it definitely opened up the space. It released creativity and really enabled the existing talent that we have here to emerge. Barriers came down and more risks were taken, and that's really important. So the first organisation is Rekindle. These will be familiar to Christchurch people. Rekindle was founded by Juliet. She was an occupational therapist, and she saw Rekindle as a form of healing by actively tending to the Earth's resources. This was started in 2012, and really a response to the extraordinary waste from all the demolition. I mean, some 1,300 buildings in central Christchurch alone were demolished, plus probably at least 8,000 to 9,000 houses. That is an awful lot of waste. What do you do with it all? So she really sort of started to think about that and work on the idea of actually transforming some of that waste into a product and creating also meaningful work as a response to waste. And actually that's where her story started. I mean, these are beautiful, by the way, if you can get hold of one, which you probably can't. Having started there, it was actually, okay, well, what can we actually do as an example for how to deal with waste? So she came up with the idea of a whole house reuse, which actually was to dismantle a whole house and find ways to reuse all of that waste into other products, and created a fantastic exhibition, which actually basically used every single piece of this house into some other form of product. And it was almost a reaction to the ease of demolition. You know, you can just thrash through a house, knock it to the ground, pick it up, take it to some landfill waste and dump it. And this was actually saying, well, hold on a sec. I want to honour the embodied energy of this house and give it new purpose by repurposing the materials. And that was really the driver here. And I think what was really interesting around the Rekindle approach was that it wasn't really about setting up a business. It was really thinking about creative opportunities for resourcefulness, and as I guess part of Juliet's training as an occupational therapist, that came very strongly. And what was also good to know is it didn't go according to plan. You know, none of these things are straight journeys to success. There are lots of ups and downs. They had a huge amount of media coverage because the media was always looking for good stories that were coming out of the earthquake. And there was a real focus on this manufacturing business. Everyone goes, oh, I'd like a table, I'd like a chair. And it was like, well, actually, that wasn't really the idea. We didn't really want to become a manufacturing business. And that's where the kind of the social piece comes in. So Juliet shifted her thinking, actually, really much more to about being resourceful as opposed to the resources themselves. So focusing on the ability to actually generate good outcomes from actually working with resources. And connect with communities as well. So in a way, the focus was not so much on the end product, but the experience of transforming those resources into something that was useful for the community. Juliet then set up Resourceful Otatahi, looking at workshops, focusing on giving opportunity to participate in resourceful reuse, and shifting her focus away so much from the revenue in terms of product and more about experience, less focus on the problem of waste, more focus on the solution. And it was all about developing resourcefulness, not just on an individual basis, but also within the community. And what that shows is this interesting journey from becoming a social enterprise and shifting between the social aspects of it and the enterprise aspects of it. And there's not necessarily an end point to that. It's actually an ongoing journey. The second product I want to look at is Cultivate. And I can see some of the Cultivate people in the room. That's fantastic. This was founded by Bailey. He had a background in research and planning, a degree in environmental management. And the origin of the idea was not so much the earthquake. He was thinking about this before the earthquake, but the earthquake opened up an opportunity to bring people together in a collective form. Food resilience was something that came out of the earthquake. We had all this space. People needed food. The experience of the earthquake had brought people closer together, so there were opportunities to work with neighbours and work with communities. Food banks were started, and it's really an incredible way of bringing the community together. He started Garden City 2.0 and started growing food, urban farming. It was fantastic. It gave people something that they could do that was productive, connected them back to the earth, and really sort of helped Bailey with his own personal purpose, which was not so much about business, but the passion for giving life to people and plants. He sold the Garden City 2.0 business to Ubi in 2016 and started Cultivate in 2016. And what Bailey learned in that time is that he really loves gardening. He loves being out there, loves getting his hands into the soil, and loves getting other people into that activity as well. And the Cultivate focus for him was really about working with young people around developing health and well-being, inspiring young people to live lives that they value by connecting them to the earth and the basics of food production and food distribution within the community. And as he says quite lyrically, seeing that relationship between awakening life in seeds to that of awakening the spirit in a child. So it was a really sort of personal journey. He's moved on to developing a circular economy. Let me get this thing going. With lots of different pieces of the food production. So the growing piece, the distribution piece, the composting piece, and bringing the whole thing together. And that's allowing young people to come together and actually understand how the community operates, how they can be a productive part of that, and having food and nature at the base of it. So integrating youth into every aspect of that. And one, obviously, the advantages of the earthquake is that we had a lot of space. And space is a very, very common theme for all of us. We had vacant land, we have very good quality arable land here. And Christchurch, was founded in the modern era on a swamp, on wetlands, so very, very diverse soils and nutrients. And I think one of the recognitions out of the earthquake was this need for resilience. Resilience around our water systems, our housing systems, transport systems, but also our food systems as well. So that food resilience piece was a very important piece of it, and connecting people actually back to where their food comes from. The third one is a great organisation called Ohu, and this is a great story about community and buildings and how you bring those together. Started by Camille Young, who was an architect for 10 years in Europe, came to be part of the rebuild like so many other people who weren't from Christchurch. Ohu in Te Reo means people working together, intentionally a bicultural name. And the purpose is to build a community by building buildings. It stems from the Pallet Pavilion, which was really one of the first buildings to be created after the earthquake. It's cool, I know, it's cool. I wish it was still there today, but the thing is, the people are still there today, and I think that's really the whole point. So the Pallet Pavilion was an amazing project where we first learned, and Camille really first understood, that you can build a community by building a building, a space, ultimately, where people can gather. 250 volunteers built this space, as a place to gather in the centre of the city during the peak of demolition. It was the one place people could come, they could be together, they could plan, they could talk, they could communicate, they could hold each other. And it became less about the building itself or the space and much more about the community. So it's really a stripped back idea of a building. And that community still exists today, and a lot of those people are here and have gone on to do incredible things. The second project that Camille worked on was Exchange Christchurch, which is still going today. Opened in a warehouse in 2014 after raising some capital and then finding a building for a sort of cooperative space. And the prototype here was trying to build a community around a common purpose to cultivate a creative ecology. And both of these projects, Ohu and Exchange Christchurch, and also the Pallet Pavilion, show that there's an invisible architecture, not dissimilar from the physical architecture of space, and this can be designed to support people. And that communities really thrive when their physical space mirrors their social structures and connects people in relevant ways. And I think when we look at these three projects, Rekindle, Cultivate, Exchange Christchurch, the Pallet Pavilion, they're all about connecting people together. And that's a really important part of social enterprise. The talk is not so much about the business piece. Yes, these things need to fund themselves, but it's about people. And Ohu has three purposes. One is to create connected spaces, to build community, and also quite importantly when we think about the inequality issue, to distribute wealth equitably. And I think that's an important aspect of social enterprise. Another project that she is working on is Kaulitz Corner, which is over in Littleton through the tunnel, which is the first project to develop a permanent building that demonstrates how we can build a regenerative economy for a community. Littleton already has a very strong and connected community, and this is going to be an incredible enterprise. It will be open for crowdfunding, hopefully mid next year, and I'm really looking forward to see what the community can generate on that piece of land. So what's interesting is that all of these three projects and many of the other projects that have come out post-earthquake have focused around well-being and really actually how do we lift the community, how do we lift people's spirits, how do we connect people together, but still actually run organisations that actually can fund themselves and produce other outcomes as well. Well-being, community, balance. And I think that's really what Christchurch is about. That's what Christchurch, I think, offers. And what is common about all those projects is that sense of community that they're trying to build. And it seems to me, as we move from an extractive economic approach to a more regenerative economic approach, we're actually going back almost 250 years to the Enlightenment, where sort of, I guess, modern economic theory came from, where business actually was supposed to be about social outcomes. It's kind of lost its way in the last 30 years, and social enterprise actually is going to help us put us back onto track. Another opportunity that's come out of Christchurch is the Impact Hub. This is going to be a central hub connecting national, local, global businesses, a purpose-built building in the central city to connect purpose businesses, bringing together experienced businesses, small startups, through to established businesses, and including also a business school for impact. So what better place to have it than the centre of Christchurch? You know, it will recognise issues like the future of work, depending on connecting people together, connecting community to well-being and commercial experience. And looking more at the 21st century skills that we need to grow our society as opposed to the economy, you know, creativity, collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and really taking advantage of the great opportunity that we have. And I think some of the lessons, and people have alluded to those, is that, you know, we don't have to wait for a disaster to do social enterprise. We don't have to wait for a disaster to provide the space for people. We don't need to wait for a disaster to allow communities to self-organise and lead their own development. But what's clear about these social enterprises is they started to help build a new canvas for this city. We have the people. We want more people to come here. And I think there's a sense that putting the social into enterprise is the next stage of societal development. Christchurch is a wonderful place to make that happen. I think it took a disaster to kind of shake the shackles off and to open up the space for people. But I think the lessons are that, you know, for governments, both central and local, is actually this isn't something that people need to focus on. This is something that actually can build resilience in cities and villages and towns. And that if we embed social enterprise into our current economic system, we're going to have much better outcomes and be also in a much better position to deal with disasters when they come along. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Good,